She volunteered every weekend, but I found out where she really was. I always thought my wife's weekend volunteering was one of the most admirable things about her. Every Saturday morning, without fail, she'd get up before sunrise, put on those faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, tie her hair in a messy bun, and head out with that tired but determined look on her face. She said she was helping at a local food bank across town, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 5 years, and while we weren't perfect, I thought we had a stable, loving relationship. I worked long hours in IT, so I wasn't around much during the weekdays, and I always admired how she used her free time to give back. It made me proud to tell people, yeah, my wife spends her weekends helping those in need. But lately, something started to feel off. It began with small things. She'd come home later than usual, sometimes after dark, even though she'd always been back by mid-afternoon before. She started taking long showers immediately when she got home, locking the door behind her, which she never used to do. And there was this smell. Not the dusty scent of canned goods and cardboard boxes, but something else. Cologne. I brushed it off at first. Maybe one of the volunteers wore strong cologne. Maybe she was staying late to help with cleanup. I told myself not to be paranoid, but then came the phone calls. Twice on Saturdays, I tried calling her. Once because I wanted her to pick something up on the way home, another time just to check in. Both times, she didn't answer. Not even a text. Hours later, she'd respond with a vague, "Sorry, busy," and nothing more. One Saturday morning, I kissed her goodbye as usual, but as she walked out, I noticed something strange. Her volunteer bag looked different. The straps were brand new, and when she slung it over her shoulder, I caught a glimpse inside. Lip gloss, perfume, a hair straightener. Not exactly standard food bank supplies. That's when my stomach dropped. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told myself I was being crazy, that I was just overthinking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. So, the next weekend, I made a decision. I told her I'd be working from home on Saturday, kissed her goodbye like always. And the moment she turned the corner, I grabbed my keys and followed her. She didn't drive toward the food bank. She didn't even go in that direction. Instead, she merged onto the freeway and headed 20 minutes in the opposite direction, toward a part of the city we never visited. And when she finally pulled over and got out of the car, my heart started pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Because where she walked into wasn't a food bank at all. The night of my so-called work conference still haunts me, not because I was unfaithful, but because that was the night I realized my wife had mastered the art of lying better than anyone I'd ever met. I remember calling her from the hotel lobby around 8 p.m., the city skyline glowing behind me. She picked up on the third ring, her voice soft, almost distracted, telling me she was just curled up on the couch with some tea, catching up on her shows. It sounded perfectly ordinary, almost comforting. But the longer I listened, the more something felt off. We'd been married for 6 years. Laura had always been the kind of woman who couldn't hide her excitement over small things, like a new recipe she'd tried or a funny moment with a coworker. That night, her voice felt restrained, almost staged. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, I was the one out of town, and maybe the distance was just getting to me. But then I heard it, barely audible in the background. Music. Not the kind she listened to. This wasn't her mellow acoustic playlists. It was heavy bass, the kind of beat that belonged in a club or a loud bar. When I asked about it, she paused for a split second too long before saying, "Oh, that? It's just from the TV." I didn't push her. I should have. The next morning, I sent her a good morning text. No reply. Hours later, she responded with, "Sorry, fell asleep early and slept in. Must have been exhausted." Exhausted from what? She never slept more than 8 hours, even on weekends. I got home 2 days later, determined to shake off the unease. But as soon as I walked in, I noticed the faint smell of cologne, one that wasn't mine, lingering in the living room. That's when I knew my gut wasn't lying. I just didn't have proof. Not yet. That week, I started paying closer attention. Her phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now glued to her hand. She'd tilted away from me, laugh at messages she wouldn't explain, and suddenly start working late, despite never having late shifts before. The breaking point came when she told me she'd be going to a friend's birthday dinner. I offered to drive her, but she insisted on taking an Uber, claiming the restaurant was downtown and parking would be a nightmare. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. That's when I decided, no more guessing. I was going to find out exactly what Laura was hiding, even if it shattered me. And I had the perfect plan forming in my head. If she thought she was the only one capable of deception, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. After that night at the restaurant, I couldn't shake the image of Sophie's face when she looked at Liam. It wasn't just a smile, it was that deep, knowing kind of look you give someone when you share a secret. I tried telling myself I was being paranoid, that maybe she was just being friendly, but little things started adding up. For example, Liam started staying late at the shop more often. He'd come home saying he had inventory to finish, or paperwork that piled up. The first time, I believed him. The second time, I noticed he didn't smell like engine oil or brake dust. He smelled like Sophie's perfume. She had this specific scent, light but sharp, that lingered in the air every time she left our place. And one night when he got home, I could swear it clung to his hoodie. Then there were the text messages. I'm not the type to snoop, but one evening his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I glanced at the screen and saw Sophie's name. The message preview read, "Still thinking about it, can't stop smiling." My heart dropped, but before I could read more, the notification disappeared. When he came out, towel around his waist, I asked casually what Sophie needed. He froze, just for half a second, before saying, she was asking about a part for her car. His eyes didn't meet mine. The biggest red flag came 2 weeks later. Liam told me he'd be out late helping Sophie move some furniture because her brother was out of town. It sounded weird. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment and didn't even have heavy furniture. Around 10 p.m., I called her phone to check in. No answer. 10 minutes later, I called again, and this time it went straight to voicemail. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my keys, telling myself I was just going to drive by her place to make sure everything was fine. When I pulled up, her apartment was dark. No lights, no car in the driveway. But as I turned the corner to head home, I spotted Liam's truck parked 2 streets away, right outside a small motel. The blinds in one of the rooms were drawn, but a strip of warm light glowed from the gap at the bottom. I didn't confront them that night. My hands were shaking too badly, and I needed proof, undeniable proof, before I said a word. That's when I decided I'd catch them in a way they couldn't talk themselves out of. The next few days, I kept telling myself I was overreacting. People joke around all the time, right? But then I started noticing patterns that I couldn't unsee. Every Friday night, when Sarah said she had late inventory, her location on Find My Friends would suddenly go dark. She used to keep it on all the time, even when she traveled for work, so it felt deliberate. I tested it one Friday. I texted her at 9:15 p.m. "How's work going?" No reply. I called her straight to voicemail. By the time she texted back at 11:37, it was the same generic line. "Sorry, super busy, heading home soon." I asked what they were counting, and she sent some vague joke about mountains of boxes. But when she came home, her hair was damp, her perfume was fresh, and her makeup was reapplied. Who fixes their eyeliner after counting boxes in a dusty stockroom? I didn't confront her. Instead, I got quieter, more observant. I checked her car one Saturday morning before she left for volunteering. The passenger seat was adjusted way back far too much for her short legs. When I casually asked if she'd given someone a ride, she brushed it off. Oh, must have been from the car wash. But we hadn't been to a car wash in weeks. That's when I started digging deeper. I knew her work schedule, but I wanted to see what happened on those volunteer days. I asked my buddy Mike, who's a firefighter and knows a lot of people in town, if he'd ever heard of this animal shelter. He looked puzzled and said, "The only one around here is run by Linda on Maple Street, and they're always desperate for volunteers. But they don't do Saturday, only shifts everyone helps during the week." That was my crack in the wall. The next Saturday, I drove to the Maple Street shelter myself. I walked in, pretending I was interested in volunteering. Linda was friendly, but when I asked if Sarah was around, she looked confused. Sarah? I don't think I've met her. How long has she been volunteering? My stomach dropped. I drove back, parked a few blocks from our house, and waited. Around 2 p.m., Sarah's car pulled up. I watched from my rearview mirror as she got out, wearing the same sweater she'd left in but now with messy hair and flushed cheeks. She looked happy. Happier than she'd looked with me in weeks. That night she was overly affectionate. Making my favorite dinner, leaning against me while I watched TV, laughing at things that weren't funny. It felt like a cover, like she was trying to throw me off. But every time she smiled, I saw the face she'd made when stepping out of the car that afternoon. I didn't sleep much after that. My mind kept replaying every red flag I'd ignored. And I knew I couldn't just sit and wait for her to tell me the truth. I had to catch her in the act. The plan started forming in my head. If she was lying about volunteering and her job wasn't keeping her late on Fridays, then where was she really going? And more importantly, with who? The next weekend, I decided to find out. Didn't hear from Mia for 2 days after the confrontation. No texts, no calls, nothing. It was like she'd vanished, except I knew she hadn't, because I was still watching her location. She was bouncing between that guy's apartment and her sister's place. The irony? Her sister was posting motivational quotes about honesty being the foundation of love. I wanted to throw my phone at the wall. On the third day, she finally showed up at the apartment. She didn't knock, she still had her key. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of me. Inside, printed screenshots of her messages, timestamps from my tracking app, and photos from the hotel lobby security footage I'd obtained. I slid it across the table without saying a word. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. You were spying on me?" she asked. I almost laughed. Spying? No, I was protecting myself. There's a difference. She tried to launch into her rehearsed apology, something about feeling unfulfilled, about needing emotional connection, but I stopped her cold. You had a choice. You could have told me. You could have left. Instead, you lied over and over. She started crying, but it felt hollow, like she was more upset about being caught than about what she'd done. That's when I told her. The apartment lease was in my name, and she had 48 hours to move out. Oh, and I'd already spoken to her boss, who, by the way, didn't appreciate hearing that one of his employees was using work hours for hotel meetups. She wouldn't be going back to that job. Her tears turned into anger. "You're ruining my life," she shouted. "No," I said calmly, "you ruined it yourself. I'm just making sure you don't ruin mine." The next week was surreal. She sent long, rambling texts about how we could start fresh, how she'd cut him off. I didn't reply. I blocked her number, then her email, then every social media account she tried to use to reach me. In the quiet that followed, I realized something. It wasn't just about catching her. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Every moment I doubted myself, every time I'd felt like I was losing my mind, all of that was gone. I had proof, closure, and the peace of knowing I hadn't imagined a thing. People think revenge is about hurting the other person. But for me, it was about control. I didn't want her back. I didn't want an apology. I wanted my life back. And now I have it. She's probably out there spinning some story about how I was the controlling one, how I didn't trust her. Maybe that's true, but in the end, my instinct saved me from wasting years on someone who didn't deserve me. And every time I walk past the hotel where it all started, I can't help but smirk. Because I remember the moment I stopped being the fool in her story and became the one who wrote the ending. Would you have let her stay, or would you have done exactly what I did?